all these emotions that we have are really inside our body. And when we have a negative experience that reflects any type of, elicits a negative emotion, and it's not resolved and it's on that tape loop, over a long period of time, it starts to have detrimental effects on the physical body.
Welcome to the Perpetual Motion podcast, where curiosity meets career excellence. I'm Dr. Mo Anderson, and I invite you to join me on a journey of personal growth. In each weekly episode, we dive into inspiring and sometimes hilarious conversations with global experts. From communication mastery to wise investments, we've got you covered. My special guest this episode is Momoko Uno, a doctor of integrative medicine with expertise in so many areas: functional medicine, acupuncture, herbalism, and spiritual psychology, particularly as they relate to trauma and resilience. Dr. Uno was born in Australia and currently lives and practices in New York, where she is the owner and founder of Omni Wellness. Oh, and did I mention she is also a mother? I don't know when she has time. Who has published 2 books. She's phenomenal, y'all. Today, we're discussing the bounce back. That's my term, also known as learning how to fail well. Fail well. Don't you love it? While seeing mistakes as an opportunity for growth. So stay tuned and prepare to take notes. This is going to be very useful information. Welcome, Dr. Uno.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, it's quite my pleasure. Let's start with the overarching theme of our discussion today and then break it into bite-sized pieces. You say, rather than shrinking into the corner from a mistake or giving up, and we've all done that, we should ask ourselves, how can I do this better? Why should we ask ourselves that question?
I think that the opportunity is for us to grow and learn. And if we just decide that a mistake is going to contract us and make us smaller, there's no opportunity to really go anywhere with that. But if we see a mistake as a moment where we can self-reflect and ask ourselves, how can we be more awesome? How can we be better at doing something? Then, my father said to me, it's not really ever a mistake if you learn something positive from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And just looking for that opportunity for growth, as you say, that's the trick, is to be able to change your focus and your mindset. When we spoke before, you mentioned the concept of failing well, that I also said in the introduction, and I love that phrase. How can someone apply this mindset practically when dealing with traumatic experiences?
Well, trauma is very complicated, and it's a multi-level reaction that the body has. So I think that when we're looking at trauma, it's very important to take your time and not to force yourself to learn anything from it. Because sometimes if you've had a really, like a severe, like an assault or something like that, the learning behind that might not necessarily be, it might just be that you're just able to overcome something like that. You're able to live your next day.
Gotcha.
So I think in certain situations, I think it's important to be mindful and not judge yourself if you feel like you can't get anything positive from a negative experience. So from that perspective, I think just being able to pat yourself on the back and say, look, I can get out of bed and keep moving forward. I think that's a great win, because it's, sometimes with abuse, physical abuse, if you had a very, very traumatic childhood, then just moving forward, putting one foot in front of the other can be very, very difficult. And I think that to take your time and to really acknowledge that is a huge win.
Okay. Then I mix some things up. I understand. And that's not really something that you initiated. as well. So it might not be something that you're growing from. Okay, gotcha. And so many people have experienced both. We've all experienced failure, but some people may or may not have had serious trauma happen to them. So there are different ways that you deal with those. Thank you for explaining that.
Absolutely, yes.
You also emphasize, if I got this right,
Yes.
setting up fertile ground for growth when facing potential failure. Could you elaborate on some strategies or mindset shifts people can cultivate to achieve this?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. So, I'll just take writing, for example. So that's a situation where I constantly receive a tremendous amount of negative feedback. I'll hand something in to somebody, especially if I'm writing a book and we're at the very beginning stages. There's often a lot of feedback that says, some of the feedback is I'm falling asleep as I'm reading this. It's like pretty intense feedback.
That's harsh. Yeah.
But it's really good for me to see like, oh wow, this is really not going over well, but I missed the point. I really need to rewrite this. And so I just turn this around, and usually the feedback is in some way, it's not just like, oh, this sucks, but it's constructive feedback, so I can actually use it and turn it around. But sometimes I don't get that. Sometimes I just get, this is bad. And then I have to think to myself, okay, then how can I make it better? And so I just go into my, into my mind, and I try to figure out, how can I make this work? How can I make it better?
So that sounds really great and mature. I'm a writer as well. I've worked with lots of editors, from books to journalism and professional articles like you've done. But in the moment, I mean, what you just said, macroscopically sounds great, but in the moment is just hurtful and painful. And I either want to shut down or lash out. So immediately, for those of us who might not be as mature or as far along in our growth as you, how can we just keep ourselves from having a meltdown? Because some people really don't. There's an art to giving criticism as well, and some people don't know it.
Yes,
and it can be so painful.
It is. Because creative writing, or any kind of writing, it's like having like a baby, right? And you feel like somebody's killing your baby off. So it's pretty intense, and it's like these little, or sometimes like big daggers in the heart. And for me too, even though I've learned how to take rejection quite well, or negative criticism, there's a moment of, oh my God, that's like hurtful and painful, and just to really acknowledge that, and to experience the pain and whatever negative feeling. Or sometimes I get like angry, like, oh, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, or whatever. And I'll just allow myself to like go down whatever real reaction. And, it's like that reaction of hurt or anger or anything it's like a little bit of a roller coaster, and you kind of have to ride the whole roller coaster before you get off. So I just allow myself to fully feel those feelings. And then I get off the roller coaster ride. Then I'm like, okay, let's try this again. But I think feeling those feelings fully rather than fighting against them is, I think, key to taking criticism.
Okay. That's fair. I like that. Let's go back to trauma.
Yes.
And if it's not right, correct me.
Yes,
but
yes.
I think you said trauma and chronic illness can lead to a negative tape loop.
Yes.
Can you explain more about what that means and why the words? I'm big on communication, and not only the words we say to each other, but in this case, why the words we say to ourselves matter.
I think that when we've had not just trauma, but bad experiences, which I guess most of them can be considered traumatic, there's usually like an irrational belief that we make about ourselves when we've had a bad situation. So it can be, for example, let's just look at like a breakup. You were like rejected from somebody, right? And your interpretation is, oh, I'm not attractive enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of relationship or love or something like that. And, it's really hurtful to think all those things. And the reality could be that this person had some other issues, and, they're not really worth your time. But for whatever reason, we make up some kind of a belief about ourselves that justifies this behavior that we went through, and that negative belief stays with us. And we keep telling ourselves that over and over again. And then we meet somebody else and we're still telling us that. And we project that negative thinking onto that next person. Does that make sense?
That does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize, too, that we're doing that, because I think we just, like you said, get caught in that loop. And when you think about a loop, that's something that's going round and round.
Yeah.
We're ruminating and cogitating on it. And that's kind of self-destructive to me. And I've done it, but
we've all done it. Me too. We've all done it in many areas of my life. And most of us do have some kind of negative thinking tape that goes on in the subconscious mind. I think 90% of our thoughts are old thoughts that are just playing on the back tape constantly. We don't really have a whole lot of new thoughts from what I've read.
90%, that's huge.
Yes,
that's huge.
It is.
I have this brief moment of reflection. I can't disagree. It's probably right. It might even be low.
Yeah.
But that's some interesting data and something to keep in mind. From your perspective, Momoko, as a functional medicine practitioner, how do physical health and emotional resilience intersect in the context of mental health?
So I think that most trauma, this isn't something that I came up with. A lot of people came up with this idea too. But I think it's actually real that trauma is actually stored inside the physical body. And emotions, actually, I think we feel our emotions in our body too. Like, for example, if you're overwhelmed, you can kind of feel it in your stomach, like you feel like you can't take any more, you can't swallow anything more, you can't take anything from the world. Kind of hits our stomach. Right. We talk about heartaches, right? Like, oh, my heart's broken. Or it's like, I have a gut feeling about this. Like, all these emotions that we have are really inside our body. And when we have a negative experience that reflects elicits a negative emotion, and it's not resolved and it's on that tape loop, over a long period of time, it starts to have detrimental effects on the physical body. And there's a great book that's called The Body Keeps Score. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but anyway.
The Body Keeps Score.
Yeah, it's great.
Who's the author?
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
That's okay. We can drop it in the show notes.
Yes. Anyway, very popular book, great. And he talks about trauma and its effects on the body. And to overcome trauma and chronic illnesses that are caused by trauma, the importance of doing somatic release to get that energy out of the physical body.
Okay, what does that mean, and how do you do that?
That can be done through many, many ways, but basically the first thing is to recognize that we have trauma inside our body. So whenever we, like, for example, if I were to see a patient and they would say something like, I get really anxious and I feel like I'm going to throw up, then, we locate where that feeling is inside the body. And, there's many ways that you can treat this. But, for example, I might say, well, why don't we try giving this energy a voice? And so they have an opportunity to speak out what it feels like inside their body. That's just one example. There are other ways where you can have like a practitioner, like, for example, me doing hands-on work on somebody, where I would actually do work on, like, for example, if I was using acupuncture, I could do needling around that area, and that would also help to get the energy out. Ideally, it's best if you can get that person to speak, because the energy can come out then physically and then verbally and then emotionally too, so that you get a deeper release.
This is such an interesting topic to me. I like the example you gave about the tummy. It makes me think about pain in the neck and other expressions that we do. I remember saying that about years ago, someone who I worked with, a team member who just, annoyed me. And I had to leave that position because I was having physical pains associated with what was overall a toxic environment, but it was impacting my health. And a physician pointed it out to me. I just thought I was just breaking down, but it was really those emotions that went with on top of a stressful job dealing with that environment.
Absolutely. And, this is the unfortunate thing about a lot of these toxic people is that they don't realize the negative effect that they have on others. It's damaging.
Yeah.
So damaging.
It truly, truly damaging. And it's not just a matter of you've got thin skin, just to, adult bullying, you can really cause great harm to people.
Absolutely. And energetically speaking, it really feels like daggers are being thrown at you. Obviously it's invisible, but you can kind of feel when somebody really doesn't like you or is out to get you or just being a bully or a nasty person. You can feel it. It feels really physically violating.
It really does. And it's even more difficult when the people around you, for whatever reason, for me, for example, sometimes it's their gender that they miss, the microaggressions or passive aggressive misogyny that is so clear to me. And, it's like I'm being soft or whatever when somebody is clearly attacking me. And then that makes me feel even worse. It makes the person feel any worse. I like to use myself as an example, but it just makes you feel that much worse that no one understands or seems to perceive it the way you do. But I don't think my body is lying to me. That's probably the only person who hasn't lied to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The body usually doesn't lie when it comes to feedback from the environment. We have this whole system, like the enteric nervous system, which is, to do with gut intelligence. And, when we say that we have a gut feeling about something, there's a reason. There's an intelligence in the gut, which is telling us, yes, what is going on in our environment. And it's usually correct. I think it's usually always correct. It's, I think, a higher level of intelligence than even the brain is. The brain just stores memory and it just works on like, oh, okay, I've had this experience in the past, so let's try to avoid it in the future. It doesn't really give us what's really valid in the moment necessarily, unless you've trained yourself to really think that way. But the gut, on the other hand, is in the here and the now. Like, oh, that person feels creepy to me. You know what I mean? That's like a gut feeling that we get.
And when I've overridden that initial feeling, trying to be professional or nice or whatever, I swear within 6 months to a year, it comes back on me that person is exactly who I thought they were.
Yes.
It's crazy. And I remember, that initial impression was something, I don't know what it is, but there's something I don't like here.
Yeah.
That's why I love hearing there's intelligence in the gut. That gut feeling, really, I need to pay attention to.
Yes, and that is something that I had to learn. This is something where I learned from my mistakes, from not listening to my gut instincts. And then, as you said, 6 months, a year later, thinking, oh my God, I can't believe that I didn't listen to myself. And here I am now. And I learned the hard way. That I really did.
Yeah, those hard lessons stick, though.
They do. I've got it now. I've got
it. I've got it. Yes, indeed. Doc, could you share some additional strategies or techniques? You're expert in so many disciplines, but like from acupuncture and herbalism that can help individuals navigate and recover from these types of issues, whether it's chronic illness or other problems?
I think with any kind of chronic illness, if you have any trauma associated, if it's medical trauma or any, if it's gone on for a really long time, it's very, very triggering to the nervous system because you feel like you're never going to get better, or you have a symptom and you feel like, oh my God, I'm going back to square one. Like it is just really a lot of, it's very, very difficult. And so one of the most important things about dealing with chronic illnesses is to recognize that you're in fight or flight, and that you're, and the best thing to do with fight or flight is to learn how to control the breathing. So I always tell everybody, just make sure that you check in with yourself and ask yourself, how am I breathing? Am I holding my breath? Is it shallow? Is it fast? Because that's going to give you a tremendous amount of feedback. And those aura rings and all those devices that we have now?
Yes.
Gives us great feedback.
Really?
Before all that stuff was available, I have people journaling and writing this down. You don't need that anymore. It's
there's
technology.
An app for that.
Yep.
There's an app for that.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I've been considering getting one of those. I have my Fitbit,
Yes,
but
that's good
the
enough
ring
too.
is,
Yeah,
yeah,
all of those
yeah,
work.
yeah. Okay. Good to know from an expert, a
Yes.
healthcare expert. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about one of your other roles. You're also an author of 2 books, I believe.
Yes.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about your books, the titles, a little summary of each, and whatever else you want us to know about it?
Sure. So my first book is called 14 Days, and it was released in April last year and written over a 2-week period when I was stuck in Australian quarantine during the height of the pandemic. So I'm from Australia, and Australia had closed their borders. And even if you were an Australian citizen, if you wanted to go back to Australia, they didn't let anybody back. You had to be in a dire situation, like somebody was dying, which was my case, that you had to have a reason to go back into Australia. And when you were when you landed into Australia, you were subjected to go through this 2-week long hotel quarantine, which was basically solitary confinement. So you were put into a room with a guard outside your door, and the windows were bolted shut. And it was, pretty extreme situation. So, and during that time, because my mother had been diagnosed with cancer, and I actually had a major flare-up of a personal, illness, and almost died during that 2-week period. And then, it was a crazy situation. And then, I was trying to navigate this thing by myself, in solitary confinement. And the doctors were saying, well, you can't leave, unless you're basically dead or about to die, they won't let you out. So it's a really extreme situation. And then, so I navigated my way through that. I don't know how I actually survived. I still haven't worked out how I kind of made it through that whole situation. And then my mother actually sadly did pass away while I was there.
Did she pass before you got to see her?
They gave me an exemption to see her for 30 minutes.
Oh my.
So anyway, so the stories about that, and oh my God, I'm going to see my mom, but working really hard to try to establish an agreement with the government to let me out for 30 minutes. And it was very difficult to get the Australian government to let you do anything. And they finally did. And, so in the book I'm writing about, oh my God, so what do you say to somebody when it's the last 30 minutes that you're going to see them?
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry about the loss of your mother. And I recall seeing, people in isolation like that on television. A friend of mine and his wife were on a cruise when the world shut down, and the borders were closed. In addition to the country, the individual country, the borders of country. I think they went to 5 different countries trying to find someone to let them into their port. And it was just surreal seeing that and seeing them be stuck on what should have been a pleasurable cruise and running out of supplies. So
nightmare.
Nothing like what you were going through alone. They weren't alone, but I think it's great that you were able to, put that into a book and share it with other people. We were saying, from trauma, sometimes there may not be a lesson. That was traumatic in a lot of ways. I don't want you to give the book away, but what did you kind of take away from that? Sounds like you can get through anything, but
I think that what I got out of that was the realization that life is actually really short, and you never know, you never know when life is going to end. And I realized in that moment, I thought to myself, you know what? I've been a closet writer for a really long time, and I'm just going to go out and just do stuff that I want to do. And so that really, it was almost like it gave me permission, like brushing up against death, gave me permission to share my story. And then after that, so it kind of was a kick in my butt. And, I think that's the most positive thing that I got out of that experience.
Yeah. We can be head down for so long, just focused on whatever it is, motherhood, career, or whatever.
Yes.
And you're right. that very short life is just passing you by and you don't even see it. And then something like that happens and you start looking around and you're like, wait a minute, I'm not going to do this the way I've been doing it.
Absolutely.
And
I think
and you wrote a book about it.
Yeah, yes. And I think that the pandemic also was an opportunity for me, and I think many other people, to reevaluate, because we were all stuck at home and we had more time to ourselves. And I think that relationships with our friends and family, we got to reevaluate all of those things, what's really important.
Right. And how we want to be connected to them and connected to the world. Yeah, I'm definitely doing things differently and having a different experience than I did before that. I don't know that we'll ever get over that collective trauma, but hopefully we can move forward having learned from it and do things a little differently. And you had a second book. Tell us about your other book.
That's called Bringing Sunshine Back to My Mind. And that's a fiction. And it is about psychological integration and overcoming trauma. So it's about a fictional character who is from upstate New York, from a very conservative family, who comes to New York. She gets divorced and comes to New York, and she basically rediscovers herself. And so she's actually had quite a lot of religious trauma, so like a lot of negative messages from religion. And then also she realizes or remembers that she had had a traumatic sexual experience when she was younger. And she had totally forgotten about that. I'm sure you know that if you've had those types of traumatic experiences often get blocked from the conscious mind so that we can kind of move forward with our life. And so she recognizes that she's had trauma. So anyway, so the story is about her finding her missing parts, because she wakes up one day and realizes that she's feeling very empty. She's been giving herself to other people and not nurturing herself. And so she comes to New York and she, it's kind of a little bit like a treasure hunt. She's looking for pieces of her missing parts.
Wow. That sounds like a movie. That sounds like a movie that you got to find your screenwriter.
I hope so. But
very interested. Congratulations on your two books. Finally, tell us a little bit about Omni Wellness, about your practice.
So Omni Wellness was founded with one of my best friends, Scott Anderson. He's a chiropractor. We've been open for about 16 years now. And it's a holistic, multidisciplinary wellness center. We have all sorts of different types of alternative medicine and multiple different providers that, from holistic skincare to massage therapy to, chiropractics, acupuncture, herbal medicine, probably missing a few different things. But, there's just a lot of different types of healers and alternative medical practitioners. We work together as a team.
Okay. Fabulous. Some of our some of our imaginary audience started clapping prematurely, but just want to applaud you for all the amazing things you're doing and what all of those things. The thread I see between that connecting that braid is that you're helping people in every way that you can, and I applaud you for that, because it's easy to be selfish, self-centered, or just focusing on our own goals, which is not necessarily self-centered, but still you are making room for so many other people, and that's to be commended. Thank you
so much. Thank you.
Will you tell our listeners how to connect with you online and how to find your books if they want to order or download a copy?
Absolutely. So there's two websites, omniwellnessnyc.com, and my writing website is momokowrites.com, and there's a way to message me directly through those websites. And my books they're available on Amazon and also through my website as well.
Okay, fantastic, folks. So those will be in the show notes as well. Please support Dr. Uno, who's here sharing this great advice and strategies to help you overcome trauma and be more resilient. And my favorite new phrase, fail well. Thank you again, Dr. Uno.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Indeed. And thank you, listeners, for your time and support of this woman-owned indie podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and share for more like this. Until next time, be safe and be well. Thank you. And wasn't that a great program? Oh, love that episode. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Learn more about me on my website, drmoanderson.com. That's MOE. You can read book excerpts, watch videos, learn about my services that I offer, and book me for a speaking engagement. I'd love to talk with your group, and I'd love to work with you. So until the next time, review, renew, and renew. Thank you.